It's official. The state of New York is rationing out COVID treatments according to the color and race of patients. That's right. In this video, we're going to take a look at the shocking policy that's gone public over the last couple of days. We're going to see how that policy not only reveals the absolute incoherence of leftist Democrats, but if you stick with me to the very end of this video, I'll show you how this policy actually spells the end of the left itself. You're not going to want to miss this. Greetings, everyone. Dr. Steve here with you. Great to be with you. As always, I'm your daily fake news antidote. As each and every day, I provide patriotic analysis to help you to think better so you can feel better in these crazy and turbulent and insane times. So if you haven't already done so, you know what to do. Make sure to smack that bell and subscribe. Before we begin, this coming year will be the best yet as our Patriot movement begins to grow. As you know, the 2022 midterms will be instrumental, and many are starting in terms of the elections in March. So every one of you has a role in the outcome of this election, and it's my hope to encourage you in that journey. Fighting rhinos is not easy to do alone, especially with the stakes this high. And so that's why 2 weeks from now, January 14th and 15th, I'll be holding a virtual event with patriots all over the world, and you are invited. Our Patriot Live events have brought thousands of patriots across the world encouragement and action for taking back our respective countries, and this one will be even better. I'm outlining exactly why our movement is hopeful this coming year and exactly what you need to do to get involved, no matter your talents or your abilities. Click on that link in the description below right now to join me at Patriot Live virtually, no matter where you are, as together we prepare for 2022. It's going to be absolutely amazing. All right, gang, let's dive right in here. Look, so here we are, gang. We are now officially in a Democrat-defined caste system organized according to race. That is, if you're a New York resident, it is official. The state of New York has announced that they will be prioritizing non-white people in the rationing out of limited COVID-19 treatments. It's being widely reported that New York's Department of Health has released a document detailing its plan to distribute the treatments, such as the monoclonal antibody treatment and antiviral pills, a plan that will officially make the race of the patient one of the prioritizing factors in distributing the limited resources. Now, of course, at one level, what's behind all this is bumbling Biden's botching of the distribution of testing kits and treatments. His regime completely failed to anticipate the demand for monoclonal antibody treatments and antiviral pills. So that's one level of this. The shortages are completely due to the incompetence of the bumbling Biden regime. But now we have Democrats in New York responding to these shortages in a very particularly Democrat way, and that's through this radical racialization of public policy. Now, just so you know, they're trying to pass this off as science, okay? I kid you not. The memo released by the New York Department of Health spells out the racial component of their policy and what they're trying to pull off as a scientific policy. So the policy requires that distribution be based on findings that someone has, quote, a medical condition or other factors that increase the risk for severe illness. And the key here is that among these so-called other factors is the, quote, risk factor of being non-white. Quote, non-white race or Hispanic Latino ethnicity should be considered a risk factor as long-standing systemic health and social inequities had contributed to an increased risk of severe illness and death from COVID-19. The memo relies heavily on studies from the CDC, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, which see race as a factor in health concerns. Quote, long-standing systemic health and social inequities have put various groups of people at increased risk of getting sick and dying from COVID-19, including many people from certain racial and ethnic minority groups and people with disabilities. Now, what they're getting at there, okay, interestingly, is that people in minority groups tend to be more susceptible to things like obesity, diabetes, right? Which could contribute to an inordinately dire response on their part to COVID were they to contract it. But as many have noted, what the CDC document as well as the New York government's memo are doing is they are conflating, they are confusing two logically distinct categories, health and race. Obesity and diabetes exist apart from race. Theoretically, eliminating a race from the equation doesn't correspond to the elimination of those health concerns. Obesity and diabetes exist irrespective of race. Now, some races may be more prone to those diseases, but there's no getting around the fact that such diseases exist irrespective of any particular race. And so the obvious logical inference from this is that you prioritize patients with those conditions. You don't prioritize race, you prioritize condition. And the important point here is that that is the obvious conclusion from the scientific data. But of course, as we all know, we're not dealing with science. We're dealing with ideologues, an ideology that's hijacked science. And that, of course, is cultural Marxism. The Democratic regime in New York is now enforcing an explicitly cultural Marxist notion of a radical racialization of the population. Cultural Marxist norms, by definition, put a priority on racial minorities as supposed objects of systemic racist policies. And so implementing policies based on the racial prioritization of minorities is considered to be the hallmark of enacting social justice. In this scenario, racial minorities are considered to be more worthy of government-based beneficence than the racial majority, precisely because such supposed beneficence compensates for social inequities caused by supposedly racist political and economic system. And we're seeing this cultural Marxist ideology go from theory to practice now in New York State. Now, this policy in turn is revealing the radical incoherence of the Democrats. You see, one of the supposedly societal factors adversely affecting minority communities is that they're actually more likely to be unvaccinated than white communities. And these reports in this memo recognize this. Communities of color, as it were, on average have higher unvaccinated rates than white communities. And so this is one of the reasons that's being used to justify placing a priority on non-white populations in the vaccine rationing. However, you probably remember ultra-leftists like the borderline illiterates Jimmy Kimmel and CNN's Don Lemon actually advocating that hospitals should refuse to treat unvaccinated patients. Do you remember that? And this, of course, is because both Kimmel and Lemon are bona fide bigots. They thought stupidly, by the way. They assumed that the majority of the unvaccinated were a bunch of dumb, knuckle-dragging white folk in the sticks who voted for Trump. As it turns out, the policy that they're advocating would actually have an adverse effect on non-white communities. What do you know? It's called leftist incoherence. And it's precisely the kind of incoherence you get when you're motivated by blind bigotry, which is precisely what we have here. And that leads us to the bigger picture of what's actually going on in New York. What we're seeing in many respects is we're seeing the far left transform right before our very eyes, basically into a form of the alt-right. The left is basically turning into the alt-right. And this is largely because of a larger phenomenon that's been going on for decades now, what the French sociologist Michel Maffesoli termed neo-tribalism. Neo-tribalism is the notion that the world is slowly but surely reorganizing around racial and ethnic identities. And the basic argument here is that with the death of Marxism on the one hand and liberal globalism on the other, both of which have been collapsing now for the last 3 decades, with the inevitable death of Marxism and liberal globalism, the world is basically fracturing. It's breaking up. And populations are increasingly reorganizing themselves around their own shared identity markers, such as nation, culture, custom, ethnicity, and race. And so that neo-tribalism is working itself out in 2 directions. Populations are either moving towards a more culturally assimilated civic nationalism, like what was advocated by President Trump and the MAGA movement, that's multi-ethnic, but that's united around a common cultural specificity of a particular nation, like Russia. Russia has over 100 different ethnicities, but they're all united around a unique sense of Russianness. Either this neo-tribalism moves towards a civic nationalism, or it balkanizes into various ethno-nationalisms, where racial homogeneity becomes the new national organizing factor. Interestingly, either way, nationalism wins. The left basically dies, and the 2 political sides become those who advocate for civic nationalism that gives priority to the nation as a unique, unified, multi-ethnic race in itself, and those who advocate for ethno-nationalism and the increasing balkanization of our nation around racialized definitions of our population. New York's COVID policy, ironically, has just taken significant steps towards this reality. In the end, the left will only end up destroying itself, and what replaces it could indeed end up racially balkanizing our nation. Only time will tell on that. Now, before you go, you will definitely want to check out my video compilation, all the woke liberals who swallowed the Justice Smollett hate hoax without question. It's the most glorious compilation of self-owns imaginable. You're not going to want to miss it. So make sure to click on the link, and I'll see you over there. God bless.